The crystal glass chimed against the silver spoon, silencing the room. In an instant, the world around me faded into the background. There we were gathered in a private dining suite surrounded by cold glass walls reflecting the city lights like distant stars. My father raised his glass, speaking proudly of my sister Ashley, the one who truly understood ambition and legacy. The applause rang in my ears as they celebrated her, the golden child. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just the black sheep. I was invisible. Have you ever felt like you were in a room full of people, but somehow no one saw you? It's a strange kind of silence, the one that makes you wonder if you even matter. Growing up, it was clear from the start that Ashley was the one who commanded all the attention. She had this energy, this presence that filled every room. My parents, Robert and Linda, were consumed by her. Whether she was failing a test and needing a tutor or suddenly succeeding at something, she was always in the spotlight. It was exhausting for them. My father would often pace the house, speaking endlessly about the next big venture, the next seed funding, the next thing Ashley needed to succeed. My mother would be on the phone with important people discussing business matters, all while Ashley sat in the middle of it, holding court. She was high maintenance, always in need of something, but also a constant source of drama and excitement. She was the crisis, or the miracle that everyone around us would talk about, and I was the quiet one, the one who didn't need help, who didn't ask for anything. I learned quickly that if I didn't make noise, if I didn't require attention, they might finally have the space to notice me. But that was the mistake, because when you stop needing, you become invisible. I became the child who never needed a tutor, who never scraped her knees, who never lost her retainer or broke anything. I was the child who didn't need to be worried about. I thought maybe if I was perfect, maybe if I required absolutely nothing, they would see me. But instead of love, what I received was neglect. I thought that by being easy, by staying out of the way, I would finally earn their attention. But I was wrong. They didn't love me for being easy. They forgot I was there entirely. It was a kind of quiet loneliness, this invisible role I played in the background. As I grew older, I started to notice more and more how Ashley would always be the one to grab the limelight. And I would just be there. It wasn't just at home. It was everywhere we went. At family gatherings, she'd tell wild stories of the next big project, the next big dream, and the conversation would inevitably shift to her. Meanwhile, I would sit in silence, watching it all unfold around me. And that's when I made a decision, one I didn't even realize would shape the rest of my life. At 7 years old, I decided that I would be the quiet one, the one who didn't need anything. I would be perfect in their eyes. The silence I learned to embrace wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the absence of needs, of desires. I became a ghost in my own home. Ashley's energy and constant demands were impossible to compete with, so I simply withdrew, believing that if I gave them nothing to worry about, if I was never a burden, they would love me. But the love I sought, the kind that would make me feel like I truly mattered, never came. I wasn't a failure in their eyes. I just wasn't there. I thought I could go unnoticed, and that maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. But as I spent more years trying to be the perfect child, trying to be the one who didn't need anything, I slowly realized how much I had faded into the background. They saw me as the one who didn't need anything, and that's exactly what they gave me, their absence. Ashley, on the other hand, was everything to them. She was the constant drama, the chaos, and they loved it. She was the high-stakes, high-volume child who they constantly had to fix or encourage. They put all their energy into her while I sat quietly, hoping that my perfection would finally get me the acknowledgement I longed for. It didn't work. Silence became my identity. And that silence wasn't a sign of peace. It was a sign of being forgotten. In a house filled with noise, I had become the absence, the space that no one ever filled. I remember one day, after being accepted into the prestigious Luthier school in Cremona, Italy, I rushed downstairs, clutching the letter. My heart raced as I walked into the kitchen, ready to tell my parents the news, but they weren't interested. My mother was on the phone with someone important, pacing the floor. And my father was busy shouting at someone in another room. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, letter in hand, waiting for a moment where I could share my success. But neither of them even glanced in my direction. I stood there invisible once again. I didn't even bother to say anything. I simply folded the letter, slipped it into my pocket, and walked away. I made myself coffee, just like I always had. And that's when I knew deep down that no matter what I achieved, no matter how much I did, I would always be the invisible one. I didn't choose this silence out of rebellion or anger. It wasn't a choice at all, really. It was survival. I had learned early on that silence was safer than noise. It was easier to fade into the background than to compete for attention that would never be mine. So I let the silence grow louder and louder around me, and I just kept hoping that maybe, just maybe if I stayed quiet enough, I would finally be noticed. But all I did was disappear. And that feeling of being invisible, of being unseen, stayed with me long after I left the house and set off on my own. It was a strange kind of loneliness, the kind you feel when you realize you're not even worth being ignored. You're just nothing. After years of living in the shadow of Ashley, watching her grab every ounce of attention and every scrap of validation, I made a decision. It wasn't sudden, nor was it rebellious. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was simply about finding peace in a world that constantly told me I was invisible. I needed to carve out a space for myself, one where I could finally breathe without feeling like I was suffocating under the weight of everyone else's expectations. The noise, the chaos, the relentless pursuit of success, it was never meant for me. I wasn't like Ashley. I didn't want to build empires or live in the fast lane. I wanted something quieter, something that allowed me to retreat from the world's noise. I chose to leave. I left the city, left the penthouse with the glass walls and the family dinners where I was nothing more than a ghost. I packed my bags and drove to Burlington, Vermont, where the pace of life was slower and the air felt lighter. There, I found something that spoke to me, something that didn't demand attention or validation. I found my workshop. It wasn't much. It wasn't glamorous like the sleek high-rise offices where Ashley spent her days courting investors. It wasn't a space that made a statement to the world, but to me it was everything. The smell of aged maple and spirit varnish filled the air, and the quiet hum of the dehumidifier was the only soundtrack. No glass walls here, just stone and timber materials that had stood the test of time. It was a place where history came to life, where old violins, violas, and cellos were given a second chance to be heard. I worked with instruments that were more than just wood and strings. They were living, breathing pieces of history. A Stradivarius that developed a hairline fracture, a Guarneri that lost its voice. They didn't go to factories to be fixed. They came to me. I spent my days in that workshop with a magnifying glass in one hand and a chisel in the other, carefully shaving off wood, thinner than a breath. The work was slow, meticulous. It required a patience that most people, especially my sister, couldn't comprehend. Ashley, with her impatience and need for constant hustle, would have found the work unbearable. But for me, it was perfect. There was no rush, no deadlines, just a steady rhythm of restoring something that had a soul, something that had been lost to time. It was a meditative process, one that allowed me to exist in my own world, away from the noise of others. And yet, in that silence, I discovered something I had never truly known before my own worth. The more I worked, the more I understood the value of craftsmanship. The more I understood that what I was doing wasn't just a hobby or a quaint little phase. It was real work, important work. I wasn't just fixing violins, I was restoring history. I was preserving the legacy of musicians who had come before me, who had poured their hearts and souls into the instruments they played. And in doing so, I was quietly building my own legacy, one that didn't require the validation of my parents or the approval of my sister. In my family's world, success was measured in dollars and deals. It was about climbing higher, growing bigger, and always being louder. But in my world, success was measured in the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. It wasn't about the recognition, it was about the craft. I remember when I first started, I had doubts. My parents called it a phase, a cute little hobby. They didn't understand the value of what I was doing. They couldn't see beyond their own ambitions, their own need for success. To them, I was just a daughter who had opted out of the race, a failure waiting to happen. But I knew better. I knew that while Ashley was burning through venture capital like jet fuel, I was building something that would last. Something that wasn't driven by the volatile whims of investors or the market. Something real. I spent months apprenticing under the finest masters in the world. In Cremona, Italy, I learned from the best, honing my skills and perfecting my craft. The work was grueling, but every hour spent was an investment in my future. It wasn't flashy. There were no headlines, no media buzz, but it was mine, and it was enough. I spent years in that workshop building my reputation in silence. I didn't need to shout about my achievements. I didn't need to broadcast my success to anyone. The work spoke for itself. And in that silence, I began to realize that I was building something far more valuable than anything my family could ever understand. They were so focused on the race, on the constant drive for more, that they couldn't see what I had found: peace. Peace in my work. Peace in my silence. And with that peace came something I had never expected: true fulfillment. I wasn't just restoring instruments. I was restoring myself. The more I worked, the more I realized that my value wasn't tied to anyone else's expectations. It wasn't about whether my parents approved or whether Ashley acknowledged me. It was about the quiet satisfaction of knowing I was doing something I loved, something that had meaning. I was no longer invisible. I was finally seen, not by the world, but by myself, and that I realized was all that really mattered. It had been 6 months since I walked out of that dinner in Boston, the night I realized I wasn't just the black sheep, I was a ghost. And now, here I was again, pulled back into the fold by nothing more than a mandatory calendar invite for Thanksgiving. No apology, no check-in, just an obligatory summon. I parked my 10-year-old Volvo in the circular driveway of my parents' sprawling estate in Connecticut. My car, a rolling testament to a life they considered a failure. It looked absurd parked next to my father's pristine S-Class Mercedes and Ashley's brand new Porsche Cayenne. I sat there for a moment looking at the house, a perfect colonial revival manicured beyond belief. From the outside, it seemed flawless, but I knew better. I knew that rot starts from the inside out. I took a breath, steeled my nerves, and walked to the front door. My mother, always the perfect hostess, opened it before I even had the chance to knock. Her smile wasn't warm. In fact, it wasn't a smile at all. She was dressed in a cashmere sweater that cost more than my entire tool collection, and she immediately turned her back on me. "You're late," she said, without so much as a glance, then instructed me to move my car to the back and fix the hangers in the coat closet. There was no hello, no acknowledgement of my presence, just orders. I did what I was told like I always had. I moved the car and spent 20 minutes untangling hangers, the perfect metaphor for my place in this family. I wasn't a guest. I was the staff member, always useful, always silent, and always forgotten. When I finally stepped into the living room, the atmosphere was different. Usually Thanksgiving was Ashley's show. She would dominate the conversation, recounting her latest achievements, her upcoming feature in Forbes, or her TED Talk. But today something was off. The air was heavy with an uncomfortable tension. Ashley, usually the life of the party, was standing by the window, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her body vibrating with a nervous energy. She wasn't holding a glass of wine as usual. Instead, she was gripping her phone, her knuckles white, swiping furiously across the screen. I caught my father standing near the bar, pouring himself a drink, not even looking at me. He muttered something about Ashley being under a lot of pressure, something I wouldn't understand. I glanced at Ashley again. She wasn't the golden child today. She was unraveling. "Is she okay?" I asked quietly. My father didn't look up. "She's just under a lot of pressure," he said dismissively. "Stay out of her way today. Don't bore her with your little wood projects." I couldn't help but laugh, though I kept it to myself. My little wood projects, he had no idea what I was capable of, what I had built, the history I had restored. But to him, I was still the invisible one, the child who didn't matter, the one who didn't need attention. Ashley's panic was the center of this family's universe. Everything else faded into the background. I watched her pace back and forth, her eyes wild, searching for something. I couldn't help but notice the signs. This wasn't just stress, it was the panic of someone who knew their world was about to fall apart. I approached my father again. "Where's Jason?" I asked, noticing that her husband was missing. My mother, walking past with a tray of crystal glasses, answered nonchalantly, "Business trip." Then she turned to me and snapped, "Stop asking questions and help me set the table. One of the chairs in the dining room is wobbly. Can you look at it?" I almost laughed again. I restore violins for the London Symphony Orchestra, and she wanted me to fix a dining chair. But of course, I didn't argue. I knelt under the mahogany table, tightening a loose screw with a pocket knife. From down there, all I could see were their shoes, my father's polished Oxfords, my mother's heels clicking anxiously, and Ashley's designer boots tapping out a frantic rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. I was invisible again, just as I had always been. The foundation of this family was cracking, but they didn't see it. They only saw what they wanted to see. Dinner at the estate that year was anything but ordinary. My mother had set the table with the good china, the kind we weren't allowed to touch growing up. The turkey was dry, the conversation even drier. My father, as always, droned on about market trends, interest rates, and positioning. Ashley barely touched her food, her eyes glued to her phone, her fingers swiping furiously across the screen. She had always been the center of attention, commanding every moment with her stories of achievements, her constant need to impress. But today was different. Something was off, and it wasn't just the stale food. There was a palpable tension in the air, a heaviness that I couldn't ignore. As Ashley continued to tap away at her phone, her manic energy only grew more intense. She wasn't engaging with anyone, not even her usual self-absorbed chatter. She looked terrible. Her skin was pale, her face drawn tight with worry. I caught her glancing around the room, her eyes wide like she was searching for something or someone. It was unsettling. Her voice snapped out of the silence, tight and harsh. "Does anyone have a charger?" she asked, her tone barely hiding the stress. "I think there's one in the kitchen," I offered, just trying to be helpful, but she wouldn't budge. Instead, she extended her hand across the table, demanding, "Give me your phone." It wasn't a request. It was a command, one I couldn't refuse. I hesitated, but I handed her my phone. I didn't think much of it at first. I assumed she just needed it to check a few things, to calm herself down. I had no idea what was about to unfold. As she unlocked my phone, I could see the tension in her eyes, her fingers moving quickly, impatiently. Then, without warning, a banner notification dropped down from the top of the screen, a bright green box that stayed visible for several seconds. It was a wire transfer notification. The words, "Private Client Services Wire Transfer received $28 million, appeared on the screen, bold and undeniable. I saw her freeze. Her eyes widened, her pupils dilated as if she had just seen a ghost. She blinked rapidly, like she was trying to clear the words from her vision. Then she let out a brittle laugh, her voice high-pitched, laced with disbelief. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. She held the phone out to me like it was a piece of trash. "Is this some kind of joke? Do you have a fake bank app on here?" My father, who had been so absorbed in his drink, reached over and snatched the phone from her hand. He squinted at the screen, adjusting his glasses as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He read the notification again, and then he looked at me. For the first time in years, he actually saw me. $28 million, he whispered, his voice shaky. The words hung in the air, thick with disbelief. My mother dropped her fork, the clattering sound of it against the china echoing through the room. "What?" she asked, her voice a mixture of confusion and fear. My father, now looking at me with wide eyes, repeated, $28 million. Is this real? I didn't flinch. I didn't try to explain. I simply took the phone back from his shaking hand, slipping it back into my pocket. "It's not a glitch," I said calmly. "And it's not a game." The silence that followed was suffocating. It wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum that sucked all the air out of the room. Ashley was staring at me with her mouth open, her eyes full of shock. My mother looked like she might faint. And my father looked at me not with pride, but with something darker, something almost hungry. "Where?" Ashley asked, her voice barely above a whisper. How do you have $28 million? You restore violins. You live in a shed in Vermont. How is this possible?" I didn't flinch at her questions. I didn't flinch at the disbelief in her voice. "I restore history," I said simply, "and I made some very good investments a long time ago." There was a beat of silence, Then Ashley scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "Investments," she spat, shaking her head in disbelief. "What, did you buy a lottery ticket?" She didn't understand. She couldn't understand. To her, everything had to be a shortcut, a stroke of luck. But it wasn't luck. It was knowledge. It was recognizing value where others saw nothing. I was about to say more when my mother interrupted, her voice trembling but sharp. "The point is, she has it," she said, her eyes darting between me and my father. "She has it, Robert. Thank God." My father's expression shifted again. He seemed to shrink before my eyes. The confident, controlling man I had always known was gone. In his place stood someone desperate, someone who was suddenly seeing me not as his daughter, but as a lifeline. "Samantha," he said slowly, "we need your help. This is exactly what we need." It was then I realized just how much had changed. The family dynamic had shifted. No longer was I the invisible one, the quiet daughter who had no place in their world. Now I was the one with the answers. I was the one with the power. And just like that, everything had changed. The moment the $28 million came to light, everything changed. It was as though the entire dynamic of my family had shifted, and suddenly I was no longer the quiet, invisible daughter. No, now I was something far more valuable, something they could use. The way my father looked at me now was different. There was a hunger in his eyes, something I had never seen before. He wasn't proud of me, not in the way a father should be. No, he was desperate. And it wasn't long before I realized just how desperate. "Samantha," my father began, his voice trembling with something that wasn't pride. "We need your help. This could save us." I could barely hear him over the rising tension in the room. My mother, who had been staring at me with a look of disbelief, suddenly shifted her gaze, becoming calculating, almost pleading. "Robert's right," she said, her voice tight. "We need you. We've leveraged everything we have. Samantha, the house, our retirement, everything." It was like a punch to the gut. My parents, these people who had always looked down on me, always treated my work as a mere hobby, were now begging for my help. They had gambled everything on Ashley's startup, and now it was all falling apart. My sister, the one they had always favored, the one they had invested everything in, was in financial trouble. Her company, Techstream, was facing an investigation, and if they couldn't cover a $5 million shortfall in the operating budget, the auditors were going to flag it as fraud, federal prison. That's what she was facing. I could see the panic in her eyes, the fear that she might lose everything. And yet, as much as I felt for her, I couldn't help but feel the coldness creeping in. I wasn't just the daughter they had ignored for years anymore. I was their insurance policy. They saw me as a solution to their problems, the one who could bail them out of the mess they had created. My father looked at me like I was the last hope, the only thing that could save them from ruin. But it wasn't just Ashley's troubles. My mother, her voice barely a whisper, confessed that they had mortgaged the house, liquidated their life insurance policies. Everything had been poured into Ashley's failing venture. They had placed all their bets on her, and now they were looking to me to clean up the mess. I wasn't family to them anymore. I wasn't the daughter they ignored. I was the lifeline they needed. And it hit me then like a cold wave crashing over me. They had never seen me as a person, as a member of their family. I had been nothing more than an asset, a tool. They hadn't cared about my work, my dreams, or my choices. All they cared about was whether I could provide for them when their own empire came crumbling down. "Samantha," my father said, again his voice cracking. "We need you. Please. We don't have a choice." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were asking me to fix their mistakes, to cover their losses, to pour my wealth into their failed dreams. I wanted to scream, to throw it all back in their faces, but I didn't. Instead, I stood there frozen as the weight of their manipulation sank in. They had used me, ignored me, and now when everything was falling apart, they were reaching out only because they needed something from me. And I realized then that this was the truth they had been hiding all along. I wasn't their daughter. I wasn't family. I was their safety net, their insurance policy to bail them out when things got hard. And I had been invisible for all the wrong reasons. I stood there, the weight of their words sinking in. They weren't asking for help. They were demanding it, expecting me to clean up their mess. I had always been the one who gave, who quietly played my part, never asking for anything in return. But this time was different. I had built something real, something that mattered to me, and I wasn't going to let them take that away. I wasn't going to be their backup plan, their last resort. "No," I said, the word cutting through the air. "I won't pay for your mistakes." My parents stared at me, shock and disbelief written on their faces, but I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. This was my moment. I was done being invisible, done being their insurance policy. I turned and walked out the door, leaving behind their toxic legacy. For the first time in my life, I was free. Walking away from that family, I felt something I hadn't in years: peace. Not the kind that comes from avoiding conflict, but the kind that comes from finally being true to myself. I had spent so long living in their shadow, playing a role that wasn't mine, that I forgot what it felt like to live for me. Now, in my workshop, surrounded by the quiet hum of my work, I felt at home for the first time. Home isn't a place, it's a feeling, and I had found it in my own independence, my own choices. My family's legacy wasn't mine to carry, and in shedding that weight, I discovered my own. The future is unknown, but for the first time, it's mine to shape. Maybe it's time we all ask ourselves, what is our legacy? Are we living for others, or are we choosing a path that feels like home?